Welcome to today's broadcast of Sun, Salt, and Light. Sun, Salt, and Light, S-O-N, knowing and growing in your daily relationship with Jesus Christ, but also being the salt and the light in your marriage, in your family, at your place of work, at your church, and even in the community you're in. I'm Pastor Michael Petit. This is a radio ministry of our church, Calvary Chapel Devine, here in Devine, Texas. We are so glad that you joined us for today's broadcast. We are a Calvary Chapel, so we simply teach the Bible verse by verse, chapter by chapter. We believe that God uses His Word to transform, restore, and to change lives one verse at a time. If you're visiting our area, you'd like to get information about our church or church service times, maybe even track down some of the other teachings that we have available through podcast, whether it's through Audible or Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you can do all of that at our church website at calvarydevine.org. That's calvarydevine.org.
Pastor Mike just said, my name is Joel Ortega. We come from the south part of San Antonio, Calvary Chapel, Jesus is the Way. Our church really began over, I want to say about almost 20 years ago. But I wasn't always a pastor there. I've been the pastor there at this church for a little bit over 7 years already. A little bit quick about my testimony of who I am, how I became the pastor or how I even came to ministry. Years ago, when I got saved, we got saved at a Calvary Chapel because my wife and I wanted to get married. And so we didn't know anything about Calvary Chapel. Somebody just simply invited us to come over to the church and talk to the pastor. And at that time I said, isn't a pastor taking care of sheep out in the field? Well, sure enough, yeah, they take care of sheep, but a different kind of sheep. Fast forward, I never walked with the Lord until, and by the way, we're from California. Sorry. We're from California, so when we got to Texas, those bumper stickers that said, I got here as soon as I could, yeah, that was us. And I'm glad to say that I live in the greatest country of the United States, Texas. This is where we belong. I wasn't walking with the Lord until I got here in Texas. This is where the Lord got a hold of me. It really shook me up and showed me that I was about to lose my family and everything, all the blessings that He had for me. I'm one of those people that I only wanted 2 children. That's it. And being 2 children, I said that was too many. Well, the Lord placed people in our lives. They had 10, 12, 18, 20 children. Is that me? Is that me fading off? Yes. Sorry. And so I said, you know what, Lord? Send however many children do you want to send us? So we have 6 children. Oldest is 24, the youngest is 4 years old. We have a rambunctious little grandchild. He's 4 years old. He's going to be 5. We're in the process of foster adopting, and we want to have 12 children. Not just biological, but we want to be able to adopt. We're in the process of this. And so the Lord got a hold of me and spoke to me one time that I was reading the Bible to my family. In the book of Hebrews, chapter 5, we're going through the book of Hebrews, just reading through it, that's it. And we got to the point where this is Paul speaking about how we're still, it says, you are still dull. And there's so much more that I could, and I'm paraphrasing, that I want to teach you about the oracles of God, but you are still partaking of milk. And at that point, to me, it was like the words just sounded so loud. By now, you ought to be teachers of the law. And I paused and I told my wife, did you hear that? She said, yeah, I'm listening to you read. And I said, no, let me read it again. And again, I read the chapter again, and it was loud. Well, it wasn't until several years later when I understood, after many people from other congregations, outside of Calvary Chapel, said, one day you're going to be a pastor, one day you're going to be a pastor. And I said, no, I don't want to be a pastor. Because I became very close to my pastor to the point where I saw everything that happens in the background. All those things, all those heartbreaks, the times that he cried, the hardships that he dealt with finances and work and all that. I saw that, all that in the background. I said, no, I don't want to be a pastor. But the Lord is gentle, and he slowly reeled me in to be a pastor. And I became the pastor, not in the circumstances that I thought I would have become a pastor, but I became a pastor. And so I'm proud to say, because of the Lord, not because of me, that I'm glad that I am in his service, serving him. It's not for me, it's not for my family, it's not for anybody else, it's for him. That's for him. And so that's who I am. Calvary Chapel, Jesus is the way. We've had name change. We used to be called just Calvary Chapel Southside. And then we changed our name to Calvary Chapel South San Antonio. And then when finally I said, you know what, this is our new ministry, Jesus is the way. That's our new ministry. And so we just recently moved to the location where we're at. And even that in itself, there's a testimony behind that I will share, at another time. This morning, I know that we Calvary Chapels are used to going book by book, verse by verse, but this morning, of course, we know that we're taking a break, all of us. And even I know last week, y'all took a break and Pastor Mike taught on baptism. So this morning, I'm not so much going to teach on a specific verse, but I am going to springboard off of one verse and then continue on with other verses throughout the Bible. Last week, my family and I, we took a trip to North Houston, which is called the Woodlands. And this was for a homeschool convention. Are there any homeschoolers here? There's one back there. One family back there. Okay. We're the oddball. And I work for a homeschool organization here in San Antonio, Feast. If you ever heard of Feast or Feast Sports, I work for them. Anyway, so we took this trip to the Woodlands, this homeschool convention, and so I thought everything was going to be homeschool. Well, it turned out that was not the case. It was more of preach. It was like I went to a retreat. I came back refreshed, with more further knowledge about the Lord, more on fire. And the Lord used this conference to confirm several things that he had already placed in my heart and in my family's journey that we're already on. He solidified it. And then not only this, but also on our way back, and he even confirmed it even more, gave us even more hope. And I'll share part of this trip what we experienced. Turn to the book of Joshua, chapter 1. Joshua, he's my favorite Bible character. And the first message that I taught as a pastor was Joshua chapter 1. Now in Joshua chapter 1, I'll give a brief background about what's going on here in this chapter. Now this is Joshua, who is one of only two that actually came in to the promised land. You all know the story that they had been after leaving Egypt, after Moses had led them out of Egypt into the wilderness. They spent 40 years. And God said, you're a stiff-necked people. In other words, you're cabezón, you're hard-headed, stiff-necked people. None of those people, which were millions of people, they all died and made it into the promised land except for two. That is Joshua and Caleb. Moses got to see it at a distance. Not even he himself was allowed to into the promised land. And so Joshua, who we meet early on before the book of Joshua, he's the first time we see him in scriptures, he's prepared for battle, and he's put in charge of an army to prepare people. And so once he takes over from Moses, he's got to fill big shoes, or I often joke, he's got to fill big sandals. This is what he's doing. He's about to step into the role that Moses used to have, and now God is going to lead him so that he can lead the rest of the people of this new generation coming into the promised land. But he's not just, lead them in and say, hey, you pick a house wherever you want to live. They got to come in and battle and take it. Take it. We Christians often think that when we become Christians, so we are called Christians, and I use quote because that's what sometimes we think, that it's going to be an easy life. God never in the scriptures, unless I missed it, you can show me afterwards, never promised us that we're going to be walking on a nice green, flowery knoll. It doesn't say that. It's a battle. It's a constant battle. And it's a reminder for us that just like Joshua and the people came into the land, we also have to go into the land, figuratively speaking, and battle and take what belongs to the Lord, what He has already promised to us. All right. So in Joshua chapter 1, and again, I'm only going to use this verse to springboard into the message. Chapter 1, beginning in verse 8. And he says, this is God speaking to Joshua, "This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate in it day and night, that you may observe to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success." Now, God wasn't talking about having wealth, physical, material things, or success, meaning that he climbed the corporate ladder. That's not what he was talking about. Verse 9, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid, nor be dismayed. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." And so, here, we know that we see that Joshua is afraid. How do I know that? Because God says, "Do not be afraid." He specifically says to him, "Do not be afraid," because he knew that Joshua was afraid. I share this often with our congregation, that every time I come up to the pulpit, wherever I go, I'm always nervous and I'm afraid, because I am going to give an account one day to the Lord as to what I taught. If I taught heresy, I'm going to be held accountable. Or if I didn't teach it properly, I'm going to be held accountable. And that's part of my prayer before I come to the pulpit. I always sit in the back of the church by myself. I did so earlier. And I pray, "Lord, do not take the fear away from me." That's kind of weird to say. Do not take the fear away from me, Lord. Because the day that I say, "You know what, I'm confident, I'm going up there, I have no fear," that's the day that I walked away from you. So I say, do not take this fear away from me. Let me always be afraid, but knowing that you're there with me, because He is. Now, before I proceed, I want to just say something. The message that I'm about to share comes both from the heart of a pastor, and at the same time, because I am a father, comes more from the heart of a father. So if at any point I say something that I touched the wrong string, or say something that insulted somebody, please forgive me ahead of time. That's not my intent. And if you at any point disagree with something that I said, I'm welcome to not during service, afterwards, we can sit on the side, pull me to the side and say, "Hey, you said such and such," and we can discuss. We'll pray about it. But just know that my message comes from the heart of a pastor, and mostly from the heart of a father. Because we're seeing these children being ravaged, being devoured by the enemy of our souls. And so I pray that you use these words as an encouragement, as Colossians chapter 3 verse 16 says, that we ought to admonish one another, encourage whether in song or in prayer, to encourage one another. And so this should also be a message that to some of us should wake us up, to shake us, to rattle us. To some, just a simple reminder that we are not each other's enemies. All right? That the enemy, again, the enemy of our souls is out there prowling. The Bible says he's like a roaring lion looking for who he wants to devour. But I also want to give you a reminder that he cannot do anything without first asking permission from God the Father. You want me to switch microphones? Keep going. Now, 2020 happened, right? And all of us got taken by surprise. I'll be the first to admit, I didn't know what was going on. Shut down, you stop everything. But then I know some people did realize that, wait a minute, this doesn't seem right. And so 2020 happened, and all of a sudden things started to come up, not making sense, and we raised questions. And fast forward to today, 3 years ago, it hasn't been that long ago, 3 years. And there's so many changes that have happened. C.S. Lewis once wrote, when the world is headed straight to a cliff, those who are running in the opposite direction seem to be the ones that have lost their mind, unquote. And a lot of us were running the opposite way than from the rest of the world, weren't we? And we were looked at as, you're the weird one, you're the crazy one. What are you doing? Just obey. Just obey and take the jab. And if some of you took the jab, nothing against you. That was your decision as a family, as an individual. That's your decision. But for a country to be forced as a whole to do this, that's one, unconstitutional. And not even God does this to us, right? He doesn't force us to do anything. Now, we've had since the farce or the fake agenda, which was really not a fake, it actually happened, but the world's going to end. The sky is falling. COVID-19 happened, right? And now fast forward to now, we see that the economic banks are collapsing. China, in Russia, and our southern borders, which, by the way, our vice president says, it's due to climate change and because of the passage of time. That's the reason that's happening, all these things. No, come on. Really, do you have to be that, as Paul says, you got to be that dull to not be able to see these things, right? Pastor Gary Hamrick, who is a pastor at Calvary Chapel in, I think it's West Virginia, I can't remember. He once said, do you know the difference between a conspiracy theory and the truth? And then he said, it's about 6 months. Because then you see the truth, right? You start to see the truth. Like, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. Listen, our children, our women, again, they're being ravaged, they're being destroyed. And I say the women and our children because look at what's going on at the schools. Whether public, whether charter, whether private, it doesn't matter, including those who call themselves Christian schools. They're being indoctrinated. They're being secretly away from their parents, being castrated, mutilated. And excuse those words that I'm using, but that's the reality that's happening. Like I said, we homeschool. Not all of our children, 2 of our children do go to a church academy, Calvary Chapel Academy. But not all the students that go there, attend there, they're not all believers. So even there, it has infiltrated this wokeism, this attacks of the enemy have infiltrated. But it's even more so in the public again, in the public schools, the charter schools, all these other schools. And while we may say, well, I teach my children the Bible. My children are not that way. And I've heard this once, and I'm like, what did you just say? They're little missionaries in the field. Really? You sent your children to be missionaries in the midst of the field to not being prepared? We ourselves who are adults, we struggle so much and we fall. And then you're saying this about your children who are more vulnerable to the wiles of the enemy? This world, or I should say this country, in 3 more years, we're about to have our birthday to be 250 years old. And who knows a little bit about history? When was our birthday as a country? Come on, history. Thank you. July 4th, 1776. So in 3 more years, 250 years as a country that was founded on godly principles, a nation that has been blessed by God, who is supposed to be used for God's people and for the rest of the world. But we're allowing, and I say we collectively, we are allowing, not just the church, we're allowing the little barking chihuahua to dictate what goes in our schools, and now even more so in our churches. Thanks be to God that at least I know this church is not that way. The first time I heard Pastor Mike preach, and it was at a men's retreat, I'm like, man, I like the way he preaches. I think Pastor, I don't know if you all know Pastor Joe Marquez. I think Pastor Joe called him the hammer, the Texas hammer, because he laid it down. I'm like, man, I like the way he taught. Now, men, we, you, we are called. We've been given the privilege, the gift to defend our families. And many of us, and I've seen this in many churches, I should say in all the churches, the men are the ones sitting down. The men are the ones who raise their hands very last after wife has, with the elbow, or okay, well, might as well, right? We're the last ones who would do anything unless the pastor goes and say, hey, can you, well, I'll pray about it. Oh my goodness. I know Pastor Mike has the same mentality because we've talked about this. Now the enemy, again, is coming against our family, especially our children and our women. We men ought to be at the forefront of this battle. This is the battle that we're facing. We're supposed to be the first defense line, who are supposed to be facing this head on. And we're hiding behind our wives oftentimes, because the wives are the ones serving at church. The wife is, and we use this as an excuse, I've heard this multiple times, because she's better at teaching the Bible, because she's better at praying, because she's better at finances, because she's better. I'll admit this, women are smarter, yes, women are smarter, and they have a more sensitive spirit to hear from the Lord. That is true. I'll admit this. I've said this to our church multiple times. But you men, you and I, we're the ones who have been called. What happened in the book of Genesis with Adam and Eve? Eve was the one who took the first bite, but who was watching her and approving? Adam. We were. And we just, okay, well, let it go. The enemy is no longer hiding his horrendous, ugly face. He's parading, literally parading in the streets and making money in return too. He's in Target. Look at all the new clothing line that they had. I know that's been in the news lately. But that's not just Target. This is not just recent. It just became so public. He's been in there for a much longer time. He's at H-E-B. I know that we all shop at H-E-B. You know that H-E-B in Austin, they sponsor, they pay for the parades, the pride parades multiple times. And I'm not saying to go boycott it. Each one of you will make decisions about what you will, won't do. Chick-fil-A. I know everybody holds Chick-fil-A so high. Me personally, I've never really felt for Chick-fil-A sandwich. I like it, but even Chick-fil-A has bent towards the wokeism. The first time it became apparent to me was again in 2020 when a famous rapper went, I don't mind saying his name, Lecrae, said that aligned with the BLM stuff, and he made a white person clean his shoes in public and being live streamed. And I'm like, really? sponsored by Chick-fil-A. Now, I'm not here to trash any of these companies. I'm just letting you know because the enemy has put a blind over our eyes. And to some, a bigger delusion. The Bible talks about the big delusion that we were going to be all blinded to not see. But the Bible also says that hopefully those, and I'm paraphrasing, hopefully those that the chosen people will not be deceived, the elect. But we have been to a degree. And so our children are being attacked. Now I mentioned about Target, about Chick-fil-A and Lecrae, the rapper. But also, some of us, I used to be a supporter of the Spurs. Wokeism and the Spurs. How many times has it happened? Who here is a baseball fan? Who likes baseball here? Who likes the Dodgers? The Dodgers, I know they're from California, sorry. They're from California. And what were they doing? Accepting of the perpetual sisters of lust. I can't remember their name. Football. Who doesn't like football, especially here in the countryside, right? What have they done so many times? Insulted our country, the flag, which it stands for, right? Representing this godly Christian nation, which was founded back then. Now our children, again, are being castrated in the schools, mostly, because that's where we send them for 8, sometimes 10 hours a day, right? Because they got to learn math, they got to learn, all these other language, extracurricular activities, and we see it, I'm sorry to say that we see it as a free daycare. They're going to be fed lunch, breakfast, and those, they might learn how to add 1 + 2. I know this, even though my kids are not in public school, but I know this because I've spoken to multiple teachers who have left the education system. And they've shared their stories as to, now, in the public school system, in all the schools, there are great teachers, because I know some of them, you all know some of them. But the system itself is what is corrupt. I know at least in the countryside, it hasn't gotten that bad yet. But if you go to the public library, at least in downtown San Antonio, the big enchilada, right? That's what they call it, the library. You go, as soon as you walk in, what do you see most of the time? Gay pride, or not even gay pride, now it's the alphabet soup stuff, and then Satanism now being promoted everywhere you look. And so now you can't get away from it everywhere you go. If I were to place this little bottle of water in front of you, you're thirsty, right? You're thirsty. We've been outside sitting, in the heat, and you're thirsty. I open the bottle. It's unopened, but I put just one drop of poison in it. Would you drink it? Would you drink it knowing that it has just one drop? Look at the bottle. Well, this is what we're doing with our children. We're sending them into this filth. And we're saying, I know not everybody can afford private school, Christian schools. I know not everybody is able to do homeschooling. But we parents have a bigger task at home. Not the church. The church is here to reinforce what you are supposed to be teaching them. The school is supposed to teach them, at least, how to spell, how to read, multiplication. And then if they want to go on to a higher education, that's different. But our responsibility as parents and husband, dad, don't pass it on to your wife. We're supposed to be the ones who pick up the Bible and read the truth. Simply start by reading one chapter. Just, our family, this is what we do during dinner time. We sit down right after dinner, we read one chapter. Whatever the chapter it is that we're in, then afterwards we allow, for the kids to ask questions. What does that mean? What is that word? What was happening there? Why did he do that? And so on and so on. It's not a formal Bible study. It's just simply reading the Word of God. But here's another thing that we've agreed, my wife and I, several years ago, we agreed that we're going to have at least 3 meals throughout the week that we're going to sit down together as a family. At least, the whole week happens. But at least three meals a day, because it's difficult for families that are sometimes both mom and dad are working outside of their home. And even when they're working from home, you're working. And I'm not saying making this up. My children are back there. They can tell you this is what we do. So it's not that difficult to teach them the Word of God.
Well, that concludes today's broadcast of Sun, Salt, and Light Radio. We hope that you enjoyed it. If you'd like to submit a prayer request or get in contact with us or find out service times, you can do all of that at our website, as well as get our podcast at Spotify, Audible, TuneIn Radio, pretty much wherever you can find a podcast. You can just type in Sun, Salt, and Light and you'll find it.